Good evening, everyone. For Telesur, I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela, and this is From the South. We begin with tonight's headlines. Guatemalan President Otto Pérez Molina has been stripped of presidential immunity, paving the way for criminal charges. A special OAS session in Washington concluded that the Venezuela-Colombia border dispute should be resolved diplomatically. Plus, Mexicans held a counter State of the Union address in protest at the government's handling of the missing Ayotzinapa students. Good evening. Big news out of Central America this evening as Guatemala's Congress has stripped President Otto Pérez Molina of his immunity, which will force him to face prosecution over massive corruption that has sparked unprecedented protests. All 132 lawmakers who attended voted in favor of removing immunity. Pressure has been growing on Pérez Molina to step down over the last 4 months over his alleged involvement in the La Línea scandal that has thrown the country into one of its worst political crises in history. Tens of thousands regularly take to the streets to demand his resignation. Now, the decision does not remove Pérez Molina, who denies any wrongdoing, from office, but instead means that prosecutors can file criminal charges against him just like any other citizen. For the latest on this historic news from Guatemala, we turn to our Central American correspondent, Gerardo Torres, to talk about the Congress's decision. Thanks for joining us, Gerardo. They needed 105 votes here. They got 132. Tell us the latest about the Congress's decision there.
Hello, Tony. Well, today in the National Congress, 132 congressmen voted to suspend the immunity of President Otto Pérez Molina. This means that he can now be investigated formally by the International Anti-Impunity Commission and the General Prosecutor's Office. This doesn't mean that he automatically has a trial against him. This is only a power that the Supreme Court has, and that it will depend if the Supreme Court believes that the proof presented by the International Anti-Impunity Commission and the General Prosecutor's Office are enough to call the president for a trial.
And what will this sort of mean for the corruption charges that are sweeping the government there?
Well, if the president believes that Otto Pérez Molina was the head of the Línea, that it was this criminal operation that deviated funds from the National Customs Service to private accounts of public officials. We can remember that a couple of weeks ago, the former Vice President was in prison, and that many other officials have been taken in prison. If Otto Pérez Molina goes to jail or goes to trial, many other names of the current government should face accusations, and including deputies, lawmakers from other parties should also be accused.
And finally, Gerardo, elections are due there for this Sunday. What will be the implications for those elections following this historic decision?
Well, it's probably the elections that forced many of the lawmakers to vote against the immunity of President Otto Pérez Molina. They had assured, or they had made some declarations that they maybe weren't willing to take the president to a trial, but the pressure in the social media and the pressure in the streets has forced many of the lawmakers that in many of the cases are intending to be reelected in this Sunday's election for the Congress or other cities. And if citizens knew that they voted in support of the President Otto Pérez Molina, this could be a strong thing against him in the election. It's the most probably that either party continues at the head of the elections and that Manuel Valdizón could be elected president. The elections probably will be reinforced by this action today in Congress, and maybe the social pressure in the streets could decrease.
All right, Gerardo Torres with the latest out of Guatemala. Gerardo, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And we move on now. We go to Colombia. That's where Colombia has failed to garner sufficient votes during a special OAS session in Washington to address the border issue with Venezuela. Now, the final conclusion was that this is an issue that should be resolved diplomatically between the two countries. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has ordered the closure of border crossings with Colombia on the grounds that paramilitaries were operating in Venezuela, smuggling cheap food and gasoline across the border into Colombia for a very high profit. Now, Maduro said they were also involved in many other crimes there. Their activity has caused shortages inside Venezuela, while Colombia has enjoyed contraband at lower prices.
In all cases, accustomed as we are to resolve our differences through diplomacy, we insist on the invitation from the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro extended to Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos for a forum for them, and it's for them alone.
UN representatives in Colombia inspected the situation at the border after its closure by the Venezuelan government. Now, after a tour around the area, the humanitarian coordinator for the United Nations system in Colombia, Fabrizio Olchild, said he could not find evidence of any violation of human rights concerning minors, as the Colombian Attorney General had claimed. Now, he added that he expects dialogue and diplomacy to resolve the issue. Meanwhile, the governor of the Venezuelan state of Táchira announced the deployment of 3,000 military personnel to assure the peace between Colombia and Venezuela not be disturbed. The head of the Venezuelan National Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, accompanied the soldiers to Táchira. He also highlighted that the measure has already brought positive effects, with more supplies in stores and a reduction in crime.
We will deploy troops. As you can see, several flights with Marine Infantry Corps have come from the state of Vargas, from the state of Carabobo, from Falcón, in order to accomplish the hard task ordered by the President of Venezuela. There are more than 3,000 military personnel. By land, we are deploying different military units stationed in the area in order to help, supervise, watch, and certify that the border with our sister Colombia is not disturbed.
And a number of different Campesino, Indigenous, and Afrodescendant organizations grouped in the so-called Agrarian Summit have expressed their concern regarding the border crisis with Venezuela. Our correspondent now, Natalia Margarita, reports from Bogota.
Catatumbo, a region shared by Colombia and Venezuela. That's where Olga comes from the Colombian side. A tireless leader, always struggling for campesinos' rights, Olga remembers the paramilitary violence that hit her hometown, leaving at least 100,000 displaced.
Many of those 114,000 displaced people from Catatumbo ended up in Venezuela, and it was thanks to Venezuela that we didn't get killed. Now some come out criticizing the Venezuelan government when it was the one that sheltered us and gave us a hand to men and women who were under risk of being assassinated by paramilitaries. And that was specifically during Álvaro Uribe government.
Others from the same rural region of Catatumbo recall the lack of opportunities in the Colombian side of the border. The absence of development policies and social programs in the rural areas has made it a challenge for those attempting to return from the neighboring country.
There are no opportunities to return and never have been. We, among many campesinos and indigenous people, returned in 2003 without any guarantees from the government. We return among many difficulties, and that is why we have endured not just one, but two and even three different displacements.
It is precisely the historic abandonment of the countryside what have brought some 5,000 rural residents to Colombia's capital, Bogota. Grouped in the so-called Agrarian Summit, they demand the government to commit to rural development, something they consider could even be part of the solution to the current border crisis with Venezuela.
For instance, some agricultural development poles could guarantee Colombia's food sovereignty, but could also supply Venezuela with food and agricultural products. As simple as that. What we need is to strengthen the economic on both sides in order to close the path for illegality.
Rural leaders have insisted on bilateral dialogue and negotiation as the way out of the border crisis, but also in order to maintain the good relations with neighboring Venezuela, which is crucial for Colombia's peace process. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá.
After months of in-depth investigations, the Venezuelan prosecutor's office announces it has proven the guilt of jailed opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez. Now, the officials concluded that Lopez had publicly called upon his supporters to attack a government building back in February of 2014. Now, 6 government vehicles and a library were set on fire. The experts presented evidence of 700 messages sent by Lopez through his Twitter accounts before and after the protests. The conclusion is he promoted violence that ultimately led to the deaths of 43 people. A verdict against Lopez could be handed down in as soon as 2 weeks. After visiting Vietnam, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is now in China to strengthen bilateral relations with the Asian giant. Maduro said Venezuela has forged a true cooperation partnership with China. The Asian country is Venezuela's largest creditor. Now, in April, Caracas secured a $5 billion loan from Beijing to support social and infrastructure projects. Over the last 8 years, China has loaned Venezuela close to $50 billion. About half has been paid back. On Thursday, Maduro will join other world leaders, including Vladimir Putin of Russia, at celebrations for the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II in Asia.
Accompany the people of China in their celebrations of the 70th anniversary of their victory. We will accompany all the government and the President Xi Jinping, who has invited us. This is an historic moment for the 70th anniversary of when this complex era began, and which in the end has seen us all emerge, among which is the great power of China. So in the next few hours, we will be signing a series of new agreements for cooperation in the industrial, energy, science, technological sectors. We come to discuss new ways to finance development that will perfect what we have already created.
Parents of the 43 missing students from Ayotzinapa read a counter State of the Union at Mexico's Revolution Monument, along with student protesters and NGOs. The protesters criticized President Enrique Peña Nieto for the lack of reforms and the continued impunity in the country. They also said that no one believed the official version of why the Ayotzinapa students disappeared. They want the Mexican government to accept the findings of the Inter-American Commission and continue the investigation into the missing students.
I cannot understand how it's possible that he will present a report where he doesn't mention the killings, the disappearances, the evictions.
A new Supreme Court is about to be elected in Honduras for a 6-year period. Members of human rights organizations that the procedure of this election is under a political and military control, and if things continue as they are now, the justice system will continue completely under the control of the president.
In Honduras, the Supreme Court is elected for 6 years. Citizens organizations, business associations, worker unions, universities, and the Lawyers National Association are represented in a nomination committee that proposes candidates and evaluates them to send a list of 45 candidates to the National Congress, where the lawmakers then choose 50 magistrates.
What we still haven't been able to avoid are the traditional vices, the political interests, the interests of the financial elites, the business elites, that are very interested in controlling the Supreme Court. These sectors also have assemblies in which we will represent them in the nomination committee, and also to propose 20 candidates per sector for the evaluation of the committee.
All the members of the nomination committee have been elected. Now the names of the candidates are beginning to be received. For Eddie Tabora of the Committee for the Freedom of Speech, only lawyers with traditional political connections apply, because members of the opposition and independent lawyers don't want to face the military controls that have been recently approved for this election.
I think that we can find independent lawyers in the country, but I don't think that they will pass the filters created in the confidence tests that are made by the National Investigation Direction, who are part of the military, and that is a very hard filter to be passed by independent citizens.
The military investigations of the candidates and the control over the members of the nomination committee make it very hard for independent candidates to be elected. According to the new regulation approved last year, if by January 25th of 2016 the Supreme Court hasn't been elected, the current one will continue in office, forcing the opposition to accept the current conditions of selection. Gerardo Torres, Telesur, Central America.
Argentina obtained a favorable ruling in its long-term legal conflict with the so-called vulture funds yesterday, as a previous decision from New York Judge Thomas Griesa, which opened the door for central banks' assets to be seized as compensation to the plaintiffs, was reversed on appeal. Now, the appeals court reversed Griesa's decision that the central bank had waived its sovereign immunity, and that as a result, the hedge funds could move forward with a lawsuit targeting the bank's assets. The court ruled that sovereign immunity was still on the table and could thus still be invoked to avoid liability. Residents of parts of Argentina's Buenos Aires province scrambled to deal with heavy flooding that has forced the evacuation of homes and livestock there. Some houses were completely inundated in the Lezama region, located approximately 150 kilometers south of the capital of Buenos Aires, and cows could be seen grazing on higher ground to escape waterlogged pastures. The flooding occurred after days of heavy rain in the area caused the Salado River to burst its banks. After the break, the Islamic State destroys another temple in Syria. We'll have the details on another destroyed temple there when we come back.
Discover Latin America and the world in our programs. Telesur Reports, The Real USA, the stories behind the tweets, Ataman, Lives, Know Your Body, Open Files. Exposing the conflicts that affect our people, compelling personal stories, and the most controversial events. See it all on telesurtv.net in English. Telesur. Wherever the news, you'll be there. An insight into Africa today. With Bill Fletcher. The Global African, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there. The truth behind the power. We lift the lid on some of the world's most ruthless figures. Open File, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
Stock markets have tumbled across the globe in response to China's announcement that manufacturing is declining. This has fueled concerns that China's slowdown is not simply about containing a market sell-off, but about the underlying economy feeling the squeeze at one point near the end of the U.S. trading day. The Dow was down more than 500 points. Adding to the nervousness there, International Monetary Fund head Christine Lagarde said global economic growth was now likely to be weaker than had been expected just a few months ago. Over 2,000 steelworkers now went on strike in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, demanding contract settlements. Now the rally kicked off outside the headquarters of the United Steelworkers Labor Union. The mayor of Pittsburgh, Bill Peduto, also reportedly joined the protest. The strike came after over 2,200 workers of steel manufacturing corporations ArcelorMittal and U.S. Steel were locked out of their jobs starting on September 1st when their contracts expired. Hungarian police blocked hundreds of migrants from boarding trains to Western Europe from Budapest's main rail station. This, as figures showed, more than 350,000 have risked their lives to cross the Mediterranean this year. But many residents of the Hungarian capital joined the migrants, waiting outside the station to show their support. The crisis has thrown the EU's border control procedures into chaos as governments struggle to tackle the growing wave of people fleeing war and poverty in the Middle East and Africa.
I don't have any choice. I have to wait here because I pay all of my money to buy this ticket. It's equal 600 euro for 4 person. I have to wait here in Budapest because the hotel don't allow Syrian people to pick it in Hungarian hotel.
And as the refugee crisis deepens and fences and walls spring up along Hungary's border, the country has indicated it plans to build a camp for refugees. European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker is scheduled to meet with Hungary's Prime Minister on Thursday, where further steps to help the country handle the unprecedented wave of refugees will be discussed. Once again, the Islamic State have destroyed ancient history in Syria. According to the United Nations, satellite images have confirmed the destruction of a famous site, the Temple of Bel, located in Palmyra. The 2,000-year-old temple was destroyed by a powerful blast detonated by the militants on Sunday. After a violent attack, extremists of the Fatah army have taken control of an area 3 kilometers southeast of the besieged city of Al-Fora near the Idlib in the north of Syria. Syrian army warplanes have been attacking the areas occupied. Hazem Abdullah now files this report.
People's committees report the attacks carried out by the Jund al-Aqsa and Nusra Front extremists on the villages of Al-Fora and Kifraya, northern of Syria. These attacks are considered the most violent since a siege of the villages began 2 years ago. Local activists say that 2 towns were hit by more than 2,000 shells over the past 24 hours.
Terrorist shells hit the towns of Afula and Kefraya daily, while the whole world and subservient international organizations remain silent. We call on them to take a stand and provide assistance in the face of this vindictive terrorism that has destroyed the 2 towns after a siege lasting more than 2 years.
Syrian military sources have told the Sun and news agency that Syrian warplanes carried out intensive raids on the concentrations of the Fatah army in the vicinity of Al-Fua. Local army commanders said 12 terrorists were killed in the air raids, including leaders in the Nusra Front terrorists, which is the largest component of the Fatah army.
The Syrian army is doing everything necessary and is supplying the towns with aid in the face of terrorists. But we are asking why the world is silent about the terrorist crimes during the siege of the killing of innocent people just because they stand up for their country.
These violent attacks come as a response to the collapse of the truce that was signed between the armed groups and the Syrian army for a second time. These included the villages of Al-Fura and Kifraya near Idlib, as well as Zabadani to the west of the capital Damascus, where the army has made significant progress in controlling the most strategic neighborhoods. Hazem Abdullah, Telesur, Syria.
Meanwhile, Turkey's new caretaker government has held its first meeting since being formed by the country's prime minister. The temporary government will rule until November and includes representatives from a pro-Kurdish for the first time in history. The formation of the caretaker government is an obligation under the country's constitution if the elections are called by president. Also, for the first time, a woman wearing the Muslim headscarf has been appointed in cabinet. Asen Gurkan will serve as family and social minister. The Executive Committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization has met ahead of the Palestine National Council Congress in Ramallah. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Palestinian leaders will hold their first Congress on September 15th and 16th. This comes after President Mahmoud Abbas announced his resignation as head of a top executive body. From the wreck and ruins of Gaza, a photo exhibition marks 1 year of the complete destruction of Gaza's sole rehabilitation hospital. With more now, here's our correspondent.
Al-Wafa Medical Rehabilitation Hospital organized Tuesday a protest entitled Disaster and Hope at its ruined headquarters in a Shijaiya neighborhood, eastern Gaza Strip. A photo exhibition of medical staff and disabled patients brought back sad memories and befell on the medical compound during Israel's last offensive on the coastal enclave. General Director of the hospital, Dr. Taysir al-Biltaji, appealed to the whole world in a press conference held at the ruins to ask for the reconstruction of the hospital and its clinics. He estimated losses of the hospital at $40,000 per month due to the lack of human and financial resources.
We need to rebuild it. We need to reconstruct it, not for us, but for the patients, for the people who can go outside Gaza for treatment, who face hell whether at the north, east, or west. We need to reconstruct the hospital. As you can see here behind you, 8,000 square meters have been destroyed. 4 buildings were demolished for no reason, just Israel's greed, anger, and madness, because they lost the war. They destroyed not just the hospital. Look around you, see how many buildings have been destroyed. Tens of clinics that used to present service for more than 10,000 patients a year vanished. They are not there anymore.
During Israel's last summer assault on Gaza, Israeli warships targeted the only rehabilitation medical center that provides treatment for long-term injuries and physical disabilities. Noor Harazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
And now we're going to take a look at what else is making the news around the world.
Contenders for the leadership of United Kingdom Labour Party took part in a televised debate. Voting began last Friday and the winner will be announced on September 12th. Favourite to win is Jeremy Corbyn, a veteran socialist who would move the party significantly to the left. Ukrainian children have started the school year, this despite the fact that pro-Russian separatist troops continue to fight in areas close to the Eastern Front in an attempt to obtain independence from Ukraine. Pope Francis has announced that all priests will be able to forgive abortions during the upcoming Holy Year. However, the pontiff fell short of supporting a pro-choice position, suggesting that the procedure is only appropriate in some instances and superficial in others. A Kentucky county clerk is defying the United States Supreme Court ruling that granted same-sex couples the right to marry. Kim Davis has cited her religious objections as her reason. A hearing has been set for Thursday to determine whether or not to hold Davis in contempt, a charge that could carry with it a fine or jail time. In Azerbaijan, an award-winning investigative journalist and anti-graft campaigner has been given a jail sentence of 7.5 years on corruption charges. The journalist has denounced the prosecution as politically motivated and an attempt to stop her critical reporting.
Thousands of supporters in Kenya gathered in the streets to give a rousing welcome home to their World Championship athletes. Now, crowds that included the country's leaders gathered at the country's international airport as the team returned from Beijing with 7 gold, 6 silvers, and 3 bronze medals. This is the first time the country has gained top medals in the competition since the championship started in 1983. On Sunday, more than 150 competitors from around the world braved the elements to take part in the World Bog Snorkeling Championships in Wales. The bizarre sport here, where participants swim 2 lengths of a water-filled trench without using conventional strokes, has been around for 30 years. This year's female and male champs were Eva Gunnarsson from Sweden and Hayden Pitchforth from England, respectively. Italy is preparing for the Venice Film Festival, which may be the world's oldest surviving of its kind. The Venice Film Festival has been losing steam to the likes of the Toronto and Telluride Film Festivals, among others. However, this year, Hollywood stars such as Johnny Depp and Tilda Swinton will bring the glitz and glamour to the event. Also, this year's event breaks new ground as the first major feature film to be produced in-house by Netflix will be competing for the festival's top prize.
The most difficult thing is to identify the film for the opening night, because it's a sort of a special category of films. It has to be spectacular enough, not too violent, because the audience of the opening night is different from the rest of the festival. It's made of guests, representative of the public institutions, authorities, whatever. So, I mean, not cinephiles, not really cinephiles. So you have to find a mix of elements that combine to meet the expectation of the audience.
And that's where we ended today. Plenty more on all of those stories we reported and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. Thanks for joining us this evening for Telesur English. I'm Cody Weddle. We'll see you back here tomorrow.